Hello, I'm Pip Courtney. Welcome to A Taste of Landline. We've gone across the country to show you the very best in food, fibre and more. On today's show, the farming family turning their own grain crops into pasta and now snack foods.
You can do some amazing things with these pulse crops.
Value adding is sometimes adding cost, and now we're starting to break even and make a small profit.
Australian whisky taking on the world.
Best job in the world, some people say. It's actually the hardest part of the job. To get palate fatigue, I'll get to about here and I'll be saying that's all the whiskies that I could taste.
And a new super-oyster.
Hello, I'm Kerry State. A South Australian farming family has made a name for itself by turning its own wheat into pasta. And it's now giving pulses a new look as savoury snacks. The Maitlands have shared many meals in their 150 years on this farm near Clare, north of Adelaide. But these days they have a whole new appreciation for what's on the plate, because the main ingredients in this dish are homegrown.
We had a fettuccine and some pesto, chickpeas.
It's the result of a value-adding business the youngest generation started 6 years ago.
Would you like some more, Dave?
Crops have helped sustain this family since settling here in 1866. After more than a century of mixed farming, the Maitlands moved away from livestock and focused entirely on growing grains and legumes. It's good country and they've been successful, but they say now is the time to take it to the next level. Enter David and Margot's son, Jim. Inspired by some of the value-adding he'd studied at agricultural college, he came up with the idea to use some of the farm's durum wheat to make the family's own brand of pasta. His parents were initially sceptical.
When he said, look, I think we should value add and make pasta, we did actually look at each other and do a little bit of eye rolling, thinking, oh yeah, find a category that hasn't got, heaps of competition. To stand out in that crowded marketplace, Jim and his wife Catherine went looking for a point of difference. They turned to something old to create something new, recruiting a traditional stone miller to grind their grain into flour. A technique they say retains the structure and much of the goodness of the grain.
We saw an opportunity for whole grain pasta because our product is 100% whole grain, so it's a little bit different. It's essentially a brown pasta, so we have brown breads and brown rice, but we don't have a lot of brown pasta.
The family decided to build on its slow-growing but loyal customer base by expanding into other products.
As the years have rolled along and we've produced or developed other products, we've probably learnt the importance of starting at the consumer end.
Despite the truckloads of faba beans, broad beans and chickpeas coming off his and other farms, hardly any wind up as savoury snacks in Australian shops.
It was a pretty clever idea.
Yeah.
Here's something just begging for an Australian, a South Australian, a Clare Valley regional sort of story and provenance.
Here we go, sweetheart. These are lemon and thyme and they're beans.
In the last year, the Maitlands have released 3 types of roasted pulse snacks, with the main ingredients coming from their farm and other properties in the region.
So these are rosemary and sea salt, and they're whole faba beans and chickpeas as well. So the faba bean is the brown one, so they look a bit different, but That's how they come off the paddock. So
These types of snacks are already quite popular in parts of Asia, but there are only a few players in Australia. And getting in nice and early is paying off for the Maitlands, with the pulses already making up more than 40% of their sales.
With the snack products, it's literally they say yes before you even start giving a spiel.
While the sales pitch takes less effort than with whole grain pasta, getting the legumes to that point requires a lot of attention to detail. Cleaning is a crucial part of the process. Indeed, investing in their crops beyond the farm gate has come with an eye-opening crash course in food safety.
we're not just growing grain, we're actually food producers, and we've learnt about insects and weevils and all sorts of things that can contaminate food, rocks in chickpeas, all these things that we have to tick every single box before it ends up on the shelf.
This focus on consumers may be a world away from the path previous generations trod, but it's a comfortable fit for the latest managers of this property, with Catherine Maitland coming from a background in marketing. And she and her husband see plenty of potential for pulses beyond the snack packs.
While chickpeas, for instance, are a raw commodity that the subcontinent have been eating for 8,000 years, you can do some amazing things with these pulse crops, whether it's making tofu or ice cream.
That potential in the kitchen prompted another pulse product, retorted chickpeas. That's when a raw product is heated in cans or pouches in a pressure cooker to make it sterile and extend the shelf life. In Australia, the majority of retorted chickpeas come in cans and many are imported. The Maitlands decided to develop a locally grown option with the help of this Melbourne food processor. It's a partnership that has opened up new opportunities for both businesses, with Pankara's pouches coming to the attention of one of the processor's food service customers.
The biggest thing for food service was Australian grown. Most of the chickpeas that they get from the Middle East, from overseas, so to have the product, they're producing Australian-made products, so they want Australian ingredients, and that was a real selling point.
A gold medal or two doesn't hurt sales either.
Value adding is sometimes adding cost. I would say that the first couple of years, we weren't breaking even. Now we're starting to break even and make a small profit.
So is this kind of based on a Jamie Oliver recipe?
This is sort of a Catherine Maitland recipe, I suppose.
It's the best.
Bit of everything.
And with the profit margins starting to look a little healthier, they're hopeful this food journey they've embarked on will help sustain this farm and family for many generations to come.
We've certainly had ups and downs and challenges and sweat and tears and all the rest of it, but I feel that the bigger picture and what we're growing and working towards is certainly all worth it.
Cheers, Jim. Well done, Catherine. It's a pleasure to be here, thank you.
The Romans are very susceptible to weather marking. So we were looking for answers. Me and my director had a quick conversation. We walked out of the structure, we looked at each other and we both nodded and pretty much said, this is the thing we need to do.
Hello, I'm Shaun Murphy. I'm standing in a bar in Sydney that produces some of its own award-winning spirits out the back. It's one of about 100 craft distilleries around the country. The industry is booming here, and some of the best small producers in Australia are among the best in the world. In this secluded valley deep in Western Australia's south coast forest country lies a secret ingredient behind one of Australia's finest malt whiskies.
A bit more of this stuff here, Ben. You want to just get a bit of that out?
It's black gold for distillers Cameron Syme and Ben Kagi, who credit the unique flavours of the peat with helping them produce Australia's champion single malt for the past 2 years.
And this is really what we're looking for here. This is a great chunk of peat. You can see the roots coming through. This is the top level of the peat bog, what's called the fog. And those, I can't even break it. All these roots then burn and smoke as well as the peat, and that's what imparts that wonderful sort of smoky and sweet flavour into our whisky. So this is a load of gold from my point of view.
And how does this compare with the peat that they'd use in Europe?
Look, it's going to be fairly similar in terms of how it looks, but it'll be a lot different in terms of the botanical composition. So this is uniquely Australian plants that are here. So as this smokes and the flavours that'll come off it, it'll be nothing like Scottish or Irish peat at all.
At the Great Southern Distillery in Albany, the emphasis is on keeping things local. And it starts with the grain that must be brewed into a mash before being distilled. About 2/3 of a tonne of barley goes into every barrel of whisky. It's a scientific process according to head distiller Ben Kagi, but there's plenty of magic too.
It's taking the energy from the seed and storing it long-term in a bottle. It's based on the scientific principles, but it's you get a feel for it, and it's one of those passion things. I feel like you kind of carry it with you. There's a lot of magic around spirits, kind of at all levels. So it's that little bit of that romantic edge that gets us into, these products. Can't help but kind of reflect on the romance of the old countries, Ireland and later on Scotland, and kind of the story of whisky in itself, and off to America and Australia.
Cameron Syme shares his passion for whisky with a busy law practice, but he is a hands-on owner. He's a qualified distiller in his own right and makes the call on every new batch of whisky produced.
Best job in the world, some people say. It's actually the hardest part of the job, Shaun. Being able to choose whiskies that are consistently good and consistently of that same standard. Of course, you get palate fatigue as well, so I'll get to about here and I'll be saying that's all the whiskies that I could taste. But whilst it's a great part of the job, it's the hardest part.
12 years after realising his dream to start his own distillery, a barrel room insured for $16 million is testament to his faith and passion.
So a very tight nose at this stage, but a lot of those sort of muscat and those sweet vanilla flavours and aromas coming through. Now, just a little bit on your tongue, I'd suggest, yeah? Very sweet, thick, luscious, creamy, and for 61% alcohol, that's incredibly smooth.
Like wine, can you taste the region in the final product?
Oh, absolutely. I'd say that the terroir of the whisky is significant, not just from where the fields, where the grains grow on, from the location where we source our peat, but even here where we mature our whisky on the very edge of Princess Royal Harbour, we pick up some sort of saltiness to it. And we've got some of the whisky geeks, if I call them that, saying to us now that they can taste a provenance within Australia for our whisky regions. So we're definitely getting that, the terroir of the Great Southern within this whisky.
And what sort of difference does the ageing process have on the whisky?
By law in Australia, you can't call it whisky until it's been in an oak colour barrel for at least 2 years. Realistically for us these days, we don't release whiskies until they're 5 to 8 years old. And in Australia, the rule of thumb seems to be that our whiskies age twice as fast as they do in Scotland. Ultimately, the largest single influence on the whisky is out of the barrel, out of the oak. Of course, the water is a very significant influence, as is the brewing process and the location where it's matured. But if I picked one thing that would have the largest single influence, it would have to be the oak. And if we think about it, it's a week to make the whisky, to brew it and then distill it, and then it sits in this for 5 to 8 years, soaking up all of those lovely flavours from what's been in the barrel before, and then extracting really nice sweet vanilla flavours out of the wood itself. Cheers, Shaun.
Last year, Great Southern opened a distillery at Margaret River to capitalise on the area's booming tourism market.
Yeah, they're 3 to 5 years. It's just the finishing times that are a bit different.
But the move is also about creating a centre of excellence for its white spirits, gin and vodka, and producing the Premier Wine Region's own brandy.
But we're collaborating with local winemakers to try and find some of the very top wines over there, and then we'll be able to make top quality brandy out of it.
Now give your recipe a bit of a whirl. Yep. So, and then you want to slowly pour that in the top. So
the Margaret River Distillery also has a giniversity, where tourists can create their own botanical recipe for their own small batch of gin.
It's all about experimenting, it's all about having fun and making your own product and taking it home and sharing it with family. It's quite hands-on. Everyone gets to pick their own botanicals, make their own recipe and distill the product. And there's a lot of tasting involved, but at the end of the day we get a beautiful recipe and they're all quite unique. You're all congratulated. Well done, you've all made a gin.
There are plenty of laughs and there's plenty of tasting as the graduates sample their creations.
So how do you rate your own gin?
Perfect.
Perfect. How do you find it?
Kind of sweet.
This one not as good as mine.
Is that right?
Great Southern is now also creating a centre of excellence for its mixed grain or bourbon style whisky at the scenic Parongarups north of Albany.
So this is a frilly Italian-made still. It's a 1,000-litre still. This is a bit different. It's a steam-jacketed, steam-injected still, and this is really made specifically for doing bourbon. So this is our I can't say bourbon, but Tiger Snake, which is Australian grain whisky, sort of modelled around the American great inspirational whiskies, the era bourbon. So it's a different sort of technology. This is really probably about 100 years old, so it's a few centuries newer than the stills that we've got in Albany.
With an abundance of high-quality grain grown nearby, Great Southern is hoping to add value to farm gate prices and cut its own costs by developing a grain malting facility in the Parongarups.
It's about 4 times as expensive after the malting process. So we'd like to then start to work in collaboration with farmers where we know that we can get paddock to bottle provenance and we can really provide more value back to them. So it goes from say $350 a tonne farm gate to between $1,100 to $3,000 a tonne after it's malted. So if we can do that within the Parongarups, we're going to offer those farmers, I guess, some added value for them. Plus we're also then going to be providing another export commodity out of the region.
Despite the expansion, the company is committed to craft production, small batches of quality spirits made with plenty of hands-on attention, even love.
The love carries through on the product. I have no doubt in my mind that the things are linked very closely, and you've got to love what you make because the love will shine.
Ben Kagi says it's a recipe for success, now keenly embraced by his apprentices Ian Jasper and John Wallace.
That's, I think, the most rewarding part of the job is working with the next generation and seeing them have the kind of glint in their eyes and the sparkle and loving what they do.
I think when the milk horses went, well, that was the end of the era then. My father believed that horses were on the way out and you should get a proper job, don't go shoeing horses. But 50 years later, here I am.
Hello, I'm Fiona Breen. Eat oysters while you can. That's the advice from farmers here in Tasmania. Supplies are expected to run low as they try to rebuild an industry devastated by the Pacific oyster mortality syndrome. Hope rests with the development of POMS-resistant shellfish. Scientists breeding those super oysters are quietly confident.
This waterway is about to become home to the future of Tasmania's oyster industry. Scientists are placing millions of baby oysters on wooden trays for their first journey beyond the lab where they were born.
These are the spat, that our most recent generation that we produced in the hatchery at IMAS over the last 4 to 5 months. So these are definitely a big step in hopefully getting the industry back on its feet, and these should be, or will be, our most resistant stock.
Their new home is Pipe Clay Lagoon in southeast Tasmania. It's a waterway hit hard by the virus known as the Pacific oyster mortality syndrome.
Funnily enough, in our game, what we actually have to do at some point is put them out in harm's way and to the POMS virus. So what we've got to trust is that we've done a good job in breeding these oysters, and they are resistant.
POMS first popped up in France in 2008, then New Zealand, and in 2011, New South Wales, and now here in Tasmania. This state's next biggest competitor, South Australia, remains POMS free. But most believe it's just a matter of time. The Pacific oyster industry nationwide hopes these selectively bred baby oysters will secure its future. They're the result of an 8-year research program to breed oysters from POMS survivors. There are animals from 76 different families going into the water today. It will quite simply be a case of survival of the fittest.
Some families will perform better than our predictions, some will perform slightly worse than our predictions, but on the whole we're expecting our best families should be producing survival rates of upward of 90%.
On the Tasman Peninsula, Ben Cameron has completely reorganised his farming systems. The Camerons, like many others, adopted a window farming approach, limiting farming to the 8 months of the year that this Darnelly Bay is virus-free.
Oh, these are all the empty baskets. There should be full of oysters in the water at the moment.
But for Ben Cameron, window farming is only a stopgap approach.
It's not a long-term solution. We need to be looking to extend our window operations, not to permanently contract them.
How are you going to do that?
Probably genetics is the key to moving past where we are now.
Ben Cameron is hoping to do a lot more genetic work with POMS survivors. He's invested in a new joint venture hatchery near Port Lincoln.
We've set up a hatchery at Point Boston, which is right near Port Lincoln.
There must be some farmers desperate for spat over there.
Oh, absolutely. 30, 40 phone calls a day from growers who are just saying, when can we have it? When can we have it? Is it ready yet? And then the owner has tasked us, so I'm going, oh, not yet, not yet, not yet. And then, just finally in the last sort of month or so, I've been starting to say, well, actually, yes, we do have some. And, the relief on some of these farmers' face, you rock up and you've got this tiny little offering of spat compared with what they used to get, but they're so happy because it's a sign of hope and a sign of, they've got a future in farming.
It will be a couple of years before farmers in South Australia and Tasmania are back to pre-POMS production. The pain is already reaching the market, with prices rising. But it hasn't stopped customers eating oysters yet.
It's very good.
Fresh.
Onctueuse.
En français.
Onctueuse.
Very nice flavour. Yeah, I love it.
It's some of the best seafood I've ever had.
Eventually, however, the Pacific oyster will likely become even more expensive. And for a while at least, there will be a lot less of them.
I think people won't really start to comprehend the issues we have until we start seeing oysters going off the menus simply from a supply issue. Oysters may become a premium item, and that's when people will start to understand and realise that their lovely little bivalve that we've been enjoying for a number of years is not easily as accessible or as cost effective.
And that's the show. We hope you enjoyed today's menu. Don't forget, you can catch up anytime on iView, and we're on Facebook. Next time on A Taste of Landline, new light on an ancient grain. The inspirational bushwomen doing it on their own.
We must turn it into a positive, and we've got to go on because people depend on us.
And farming abalone.
The two species that we have, green lip, they're very well mannered, they're calm abalone, whereas the tiger, they're a little bit crazier, they tend to crawl out of their tank sometimes.